Welcome to the Simon Says Music podcast. In this series, we will be talking to unsigned and independent music artists and bands about their musical journey so far. In the podcast, I will be joined by my very good friend, music producer, technician, and everything else, Nathan Scott.
Pleasure to be here. Please drop a subscribe on wherever you're listening to this. It helps us out more than you can know, and enjoy.
Well, the guest this evening we have for everyone is Dan Whitell, who hosts a podcast, rather like I'm doing, called I'm going to try and say this now, the Cacophony Sessions podcast.
That's the one.
Ah, brilliant. So welcome to the podcast, Dan. Well, welcome to my podcast, not yours, as it were. So tell me then, or tell us, I should say, what's the podcast all about?
So I'm Dan. I'm the host of the Cacophony Sessions podcast. It's essentially a podcast where five guys that really like talking about music deliver their hot takes on something we're all really passionate about. It's my first podcast. Never done a podcast before until I started doing the Cacophony Sessions. I'm just somebody who is a bit of a music nerd. It's always been my one true passion in life. I've dabbled in writing songs, singing from time to time. But I've always been interested in pop music. My personal taste, I tend towards funk, soul, that kind of R&B sound. But I also like a lot of electronica, jazz, rock, hip hop. And basically decided that when lockdown started, I missed going to the pub and chatting with these four guys that I co-host with about music. And as a consequence, started the podcast as a substitute for that in a virtual environment. It's been a lot of fun. We're getting better at it all the time, so it's quite rewarding in a sense.
Yeah, that's cool, because I was going to say, you've mentioned that you have an eclectic range of music on your podcast, and obviously your taste is eclectic too, which is brilliant. Do you have, when you're talking to your other friends on the podcast, do you have guests on there as well?
Yeah, we've done a couple of specials. We had Aldo Vanucci, who's a prominent DJ down here in Plymouth. I also did a crossover episode with a guy called Arthur Turnbull, who hosts the Music Snobs podcast. We had him on and did a Prince episode back in January, so that was a lot of fun. So we do get other people involved. There's a few other people as well that I have spoken to that are interested in getting involved in some sort of rotation. If one of the regulars can't make it, might introduce other voices into the fray as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to network and to work with people that I've been listening to for years, approaching people. And I think it's important to have guests on to vary your opinions, likewise to make appearances on other podcasts as I'm doing today, just so that you can build a community and everyone can check out things they wouldn't necessarily have heard about before.
So why did you decide to host a podcast, as it were?
Well, as I said earlier, it really is a substitute for the crazy conversations and heated discussions that I'd have in the pub. We use Google Meets, or sometimes we use Zoom. And I think that's the way business has gone. It's an incredible tool. So the opportunity was there to just have a chat with people in a natural environment, even if it is virtually. And from that, we just made sure that we do it regularly, stick to almost like a schedule, and just have it replace times you would maybe have gone to the pub before. Now it's just done in the comfort of your own room, where you can drink as much as you want without having to pay for each time. So it's got its advantages.
Do you have like you say you guys have loads of discussions on music, things like that. Do you have like a really like one controversial thing that's like your controversial music opinion? Something they always slate you for?
Well, I mean that's kind of why I assembled the group of people that I did, because we're all known for somewhat outlandish opinions. I would say, and this is going to be typical for a response with it being just me on the podcast, but I'd say mine are probably, I'm a little bit more grounded than others. I couldn't name a particularly outrageous take. You wanted to push me for one?
No. Well, I mean, anyone listening to this can go across to your podcast and hear all these, amazing things.
Yes, yeah. In that regard, there's an episode coming out in which someone doesn't like Take On Me, and I'm flabbergasted at that because I think it's a pop masterpiece. But hey ho, not to everybody's tastes.
I mean, I've heard it ruined a lot. I'm not sure I can slate the original.
Yeah, exactly. It has that overplayed factor.
Yeah.
But I'm not somebody who can easily have a song ruined by it being played too many times. I like a lot of pop music, a lot of the 80s classics that people would maybe say are cheesy. Wham, for instance. I think that the pop craftsmanship on display there is phenomenal. Similarly for a-ha. But on our podcast, not everybody agrees. So some songs that are generally loved universally do sometimes get a kicky. We've got a bit of an ongoing feud with Paul McCartney, but I've had to step in and say, actually, I've listened to a few of his albums, and we need to be a bit more revisionist on how we look at Paul McCartney, because I think some of the songs are better than you would. He's necessarily known for in the 80s, particularly. Everybody talks about the 60s to 70s, but beyond that, it's scarce you'll find somebody who's that devout of a Paul McCartney fan. But yeah, we were there, but now we've moved on to this revisionist period where he's going to be treated more fairly, I think.
You've now got that song, Take On Me, in my head playing with my... No, I won't sing it. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. Especially the high notes.
So do you find that as you're a pop lover, I'm quite similar, that in like music circles with other musicians, they try and like hate on you for that? I've often found that, so you've got to be into metal and know every metal, or you've got to be into folk, or you've got to be into indie, and all these buzzwords come up, and I'm like, well, actually, I had the Now tapes when I was a kid, and the Now CDs, and I liked it, and I listened to Radio 1, and I don't think it's that bad. But to some people, it's like you've stabbed them through the heart, and you're taking the soul away from music. Have you found that a lot, as you enter these conversations?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think growing up, I was always somebody who was quite a contrarian in that a lot of what was popular was not necessarily what I was listening to. And I think we're all growing up, I think we're all guilty of that. But I took a different approach again, in that I often didn't like the music that was mainstream, but also the alternative music that all my friends are into, I didn't like. So when everyone was listening to pop punk, I went through my dance phase. And I think over the years, what I've learned is the most vital thing is as somebody who's enthusiastic about music. The most vital thing is that you've kind of got to get over these barriers and go, I wasn't listening to that just because it was popular. And now in my 30s, I've gone back and said, I like that. But also the other alternative music that I was just too stubborn to actually think I could enjoy, like a lot of indie music from the 2000s. I've gone back and I have an appreciation for that. And I think what I've learned is that if you can be more open-minded yourself in what you listen to, I think sometimes other people will perceive you in that way, and they will give you a bit more leeway in terms of giving credence to what you're saying, because you've got certain ways of looking at music. And I think if you yourself demonstrate that you can step above all that and bring a bit of perspective to it, I think people recognize that. Growing up, they were just like, oh, that kid, he likes dance music and Michael Jackson. It's strange. But I think as you yourself broaden your horizons, you're more respected.
So when you're talking to the other guys, do they like the same kind of music you do, or are you all different genres? And
we cover a lot of different genres on the podcast. I think the fantastic thing about music is that it's not easily categorizable.
Absolutely.
People try, but so whereas I say I'm into funk and soul, there's a lot of, for instance, grunge, like Martin, my co-host, he's into that kind of stuff, and there's a lot of overlap. But similarly, as a big rock guy, he's also into a lot of R&B, and we kind of, music gets shared out through that. And I think that's the best thing about the podcast, is discovering things, making yourself listen to things you wouldn't necessarily have listened to before, and giving it a new appreciation. But we do cover, there's a lot of different stuff that we would say are our areas of expertise on the show. Tom's into his post rock, Martin's into grunge, Owl's a metalhead, and Dave's into a lot of hip hop, as well as a lot of electronic music, also a lot of funk soul, like I am as well. So we bring a lot of different suggestions to certain topics. For instance, we've done soundtracks, but then you've got post-rock kind of ambient soundtracks, but you've got the more pop orientated soundtracks that would be nominated by me, for instance. So we do a lot of different music gets included in the conversation.
Yeah,
So,
it's honestly go on, Simon.
No, carry on.
I was going to say it's the worst bit about uploading music now is that they say, what's your genre and subgenre, and I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, you can't. Some music you can't just say, oh, here's a label, or it's not quite right, and I think it's a really good perspective you guys seem to have, is that actually there's a lot of overlap. I should say R&B and hard rock. Well, when you dive down into the core of them, there's definitely a lot of overlap in that, even though you often get those, I certainly know some fans that like live by the sword, die by the sword, and anything that's not in their little category is wrong. But I think, music's not that simple, and I don't think it should be put into a box like that.
Yeah. And it's important to recognize that it's very difficult to talk about music on a completely objective level. So everybody's got their own tastes, and it's really hard to not approach something with some predisposed negativity because it's not your genre.
So because of all the lockdown that's happened, as you know, since April last year, would you say the podcast has been majorly affected by any of it, would you say?
Well, we started in June of 2020, so we've never actually done the podcast out of lockdown, and that leads me to think that podcasts, if anything, may suffer after lockdown, because I think for many people doing podcasts, it's been a coping mechanism. But I think we've decided that we're going to do the show long beyond the end of lockdown. But I think that is exciting because that gives us opportunities to get together. I think we're going to go and review a show in Manchester in September, everything being well. We're going to go and see Working Men's Club, and it gives us opportunity to go to gigs and provide reviews, which is more content that we can deliver to the podcast, gives us more avenues to explore.
I think the space has definitely opened up in lockdown because there's been a lot less music released, full stop, or there might have been a couple of singles released, but not an album, and certainly, you think of I've certainly done it, and diehard music fans is you'll take time to listen to a brand new album if you like the artist or you really want to, and that could be an hour and a half, 45 minutes, where a lot of podcasts have taken up that space where there's been less albums. So it's interesting what you say that they could suffer afterwards, which is interesting. I wonder whether music can take that territory back, and whether listening to a whole album is a dying art because of lockdown, possibly. What do you guys think on that? Not on your watch, no.
No, the album will never die. I'm a perennial album listener. I will always judge an artist by their album output as opposed to their single output. My favourite acts tend to be more album orientated, whereas singles bands like Queen, for instance, are not generally my bag. I would take a Talking Heads kind of act over that. every day. So for me, the album can't go anywhere. And there's still a lot of very good albums coming out.
Yes, yeah.
We did a show on Album of the Year 2020, and there was a lot of good music that came out. And there's still a lot of good music coming out this year. Lana Del Rey's had a really good album out, for instance, this year. And I think music, I think all that's happening in music at the moment is that the big artists, your Kendrick Lamar's, your Drake's, they're holding back music until the end of lockdown. So I think at the end of 2021, I think music will step confidently back into the area that's maybe been encroached on a bit by the podcast industry. But I think you can't really have, well, certainly as a music podcaster, you can't have music podcasts without music. So I think there's definitely a market to have both simultaneously. I don't think we need to worry about podcasts going anywhere. But I do think that it's only there if people want it. If people want to keep making the podcasts when they've got more opportunities to do other things. But I think the audience is still very much there.
So when you do your podcasting, are you actually following a script, or do you just do everything off the cuff, like, for example, I'm doing?
It's majority of it is off the cuff. And I think that I would promote more podcasts to do the same, because I think the appeal of the podcast is the natural conversations that can spiral off into tangents, and that stem from spontaneity. I think that as far as my podcast goes, I will write an intro to the podcast, lay out some framework for how it's going to go, and use questions to introduce new topics and maybe prompt further discussion if I feel it's there. But generally, that's all I do. So I write the intro, and I just we prepare for the subjects by nominating songs in advance anyway. So we know what songs are going to be discussed usually. Sometimes we cover topics where it's designed to be a surprise, but in the majority of conversations, we know what we're going to talk about, and we just let everybody do their own research and let it unfurl without too much rigid structure.
It's like pub chat, isn't it? You don't go to a pub with notes on your phone or an A4 piece of paper to say, "Well, I'm going to talk to my friends today about this." You know, I feel podcasts are a similar thing. You know, you do get some, you know, that are scripted and have their purpose for that, like documentary style podcasts. But generally speaking, as you said, you know, particularly around music, it's about that spontaneity. You know, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Well, music itself is spontaneous in a lot of instances. A lot of great music comes from just jam sessions.
Yeah, agreed.
So a podcast, I look at it almost in the same way. The best conversations are going to come from the moments of magic where somebody says something unexpected, and that's what I encourage on our podcast.
You know, when someone comes into a studio and says, "Right, this is exactly how I want it," it never ends up that way, and that's a good thing, because you get in there and you go, "Oh, actually, what would this sound like?" You know, and I much prefer, say, you know, come to me with the lyrics and chords, and we'll just go from there, and we'll see what happens. And generally, I found that's where the best music comes from. Is, you know, you're in that moment, you're doing it there. You're not planning it for hours and hours, and even if you do, that goes out the window. You know, and suddenly you get these, as you said, moments of magic. A little riff here and there, an intro, a change in a chorus that elevates a song to the next level, I find.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So going back to the title, I'm going to try and say the title again, the Cacophony Sessions. Why did you give it the name? Because I told you I'm going to completely the Cacophony. I can't even say it properly.
Well, cacophony is like a build-up of sound, and it's a word that is intriguing enough to be unique, because it's difficult to pronounce. So it's a little bit challenging, which makes it less Googleable. But it means that there are people, there's people less likely to use it. So I just had it as almost a unique identifier. But I think that the word itself covers pretty much what we are. It's abrasive conversation in places. We get a bit heated. And yeah, I just thought that it's almost like the juxtaposition between the word cacophony, meaning like a build-up of sound, and it's quite jagged, as opposed to sessions, which is quite a muted and classy word. So the bit of juxtaposition there. but everybody says that, I guess. It was just two words that I picked.
Yeah, that sounded cool together.
So, did you come up with the name yourself?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was kind of my idea. I invited the other guys onto the show. I do all the editing and set up all the kind of the admin stuff. So it's essentially my podcast, but the other guys come on to record and do their bits, and I crack the whip as necessary.
Cool. So where can we actually find the podcast then?
It's everywhere. So you can get it on Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, everywhere you can find podcasts. Cacophony, as I say, it's a memorable word. We've got a bit of social media presence as well. We've got a blog, a WordPress, cacophonicysessions.wordpress.com, where we're doing some written articles now. We did an introduction to post-rock on there. We also help catalogue some of the ideas we have on the show. So a song that we call an undeniable banger is a song that everybody on the podcast will vote and say, yes, that can be certified undeniably bangable. And we now catalogue all the songs that we have given that certification to on the blog. We're on Twitter at CACSessionsPod. And yeah, we're building from there. So we're just starting out, a year old or so, but we've we're building a larger fan base each week. So yeah, you can find us pretty much anywhere. It's quite accessible. We'd love it for people to just join in and listen to some of the running jokes that we've got and some of the ridiculous opinions that we have.
It sounds like if you're a fan of music, and have opinions on music yourself, your podcast is where to go,
Yeah, we cover things that are, we don't really have any topics that I would say are off topic. I mean, we did a Michael Jackson special, which can be quite controversial in this day and age, and try to look at it objectively rather than surrounded in stigma. And we covered soundtracks. We've covered the top 20 songs of 91, so we dip in and out of eras. We've got an episode coming up where we pick Patrick Bateman's playlist for his Walkman, and we're also going to be doing a bit of bedroom R&B recommendations as well. So it does skirt from genre to genre, and there's a lot of things that we cover. So if you're into mainstream music, we'll definitely mention artists. We did an episode based on our favorite live acts of all time and try to build a dream festival. So chances are, if you're a fan of these big festival acts, we will cover them. So yeah, or even if you're into more obscure music, we go down heavily into post rock, and we talk a lot about a lot of hip hop and electronica. And we've got an episode coming up where we're going to discuss what is punk funk, whether it's Rick James's funky is more rock orientated funk music, or is it the 2000s LCD sound system? Is it the kind of punk rock with funk elements to it? So lots of different things that we talk about on the podcast. There's something for everyone.
Do you take recommendations from listeners? If someone messaged you guys and said, I'd love it if you guys talked about whatever that may be, do you guys take that on? So we were going to do a Christmas special as a result of some fan requests, but ultimately we built it into the second half of our festivals episode, because I think the listener base wasn't quite there yet for us to be that self-indulgent to just do a shenanigans episode. But you never know, maybe 2021 we'll see the first proper Christmas episode. You never know. Yeah. So you mentioned Michael Jackson. I mentioned him a couple of times. And I'm not saying here guilty or innocent. It's not really my place to say. But do you think his music should still be listened to as if nothing happened, or do you think that we should take, like Gary Glitter is another example, should we take someone's personal life into account regarding their music?
It's a very difficult question.
I
tend to look at it as though we know it exists. Now, if somebody chooses not to listen to that music because of their associations with nefarious acts, then I think that there's merit in doing that. But I think if somebody chooses to listen to it, but still recognises the monsters that these people could be, but chooses to separate the art from the artist and look at it, and it doesn't affect them in a way where they become toxic. Because a lot of Michael Jackson's music, for instance, it's not propaganda for the alleged lifestyle that he had. Some people find it really difficult to kind of overcome that, and that's fine. If you choose not to listen to it, then that's fine. But I kind of say, right, I've grown up with this music. It's so separate from him as a person and my memories of him, which are tarnished somewhat. The music still appeals to me for ineffable reasons, really. It's nostalgia. It's the way certain kind of sounds just hit you. You can't avoid that. So I choose to listen to it. I think where it becomes dangerous is where that's dictated to you from above. So if they say you can't listen to that, I think that's wrong, because I think that we should be given the responsibility of making our own choices. But then by that token, I think that we shouldn't be judged by the choice that we want to take.
Yeah, because I know, particularly when what was it called? There's something, Leaving Neverland, when that documentary came out, you read any comment section or comments on it, and there was a lot of, diehard fans and hate. And there was not a lot of middle ground of people saying, well, actually, I really like the music and I don't agree with what is being alleged, et cetera, et cetera. But, I think you're right, actually, when you think about music to that level as well, a lot of people worked on that. And particularly Michael Jackson had a lot of exclusive people around him. He was very selective who he worked with. So for those guys to then suddenly have everything taken away, I think is actually, is really hard for them. They've got nothing to do with what allegedly happened or didn't happen, and
well, if you look at Lost Prophets, for instance, there are other members of that band. Than Ian Watkins. So should their legacy be tarnished because of what he did? What he did was incredibly bad and should not be condoned in any way. But at the same time, there were more elements to it that made that art what it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's right. And actually, most people wouldn't put them on a hero status, which would be where it becomes difficult, is, when they almost become a political figure. And that's where I think Michael Jackson could be a bit different, because some people do view him almost as a god, really. You get some really diehard fans that, he was the most famous person on the planet when he was alive. Certainly.
I used to be one.
Yeah, but
Michael Jackson
it's the only artist I've ever made up dances to in my bedroom, and I couldn't dance as a kid, but I still did it, and so I think his questions are even more difficult than your other, many artists have done horrific things. That's part and parcel of, sadly, the industry of influences, of things going to your head. That's a whole other topic for another day. But I think if you can separate it, I think it's a good thing. They're still great. They're still great songs. And for me, I always try and think about the people in the background as well. Who else has made their life work this product, and for it now to be thrown away, I think would be unfair, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, your podcast is going live, as it were, on the places you mentioned, like what was it, Amazon? Not Amazon.
It is on Amazon.
Oh, it is on Amazon.
Yeah,
it's on everywhere.
You find it everywhere. Yeah.
So, does it come out on a weekly? Would you say on a weekly basis, or whenever you've got the?
We tend to do one a month. I think a weekly one would be a little bit beyond my time resources at the moment, because I do the editing for the entire thing myself. But I would love to do them more regularly, which is why it's nice to come on a show like this and just do what I love doing, and do it more regularly. But I think we'd like to get more regularly, but I think practically one a month at the moment seems to be the threshold.
Yeah, it still gets that exclusive feel about it. It's a special release once a month.
Yeah.
Was it the eagerness of people?
Yeah, I think people may want more content, but it's difficult. It's not my full-time job.
No.
So I'd love to make it my full-time job, and There's things that I'd love to look into to monetize and go via some sort of Patreon subscription for bonus videos. We will produce the content if I have the means and time to do so. So that's the way I look at it. I don't want to restrict myself with any kind of arbitrary measures. They're very much practical reasons. If I can overcome the cost and the time that's into that, then I can put more love into it. But for now, we'll just stick to doing it out of a labour of love once a month.
Do you know that's something I always find with music is that it should always come out of a place of love first. I know too many people that think, oh, Ed Sheeran makes a lot of money, I can sing, why don't I just... For some reason Siri thought I said Siri when I said Ed Sheeran. That was really weird.
He's taking over.
He is taking over. He's listening to everything, you know. I find some people go into it thinking I'm going to make a lot of money, or I'm only doing this because I know I could do this. And I think I always say to people, don't do it. One, because it's really hard. It is really hard to do. And if you don't love it, there'll be a point where you want to give up, because it's a hard industry to crack. Podcast, music, anything, any aspect of it's not easy in the slightest. And at the end of the day, it falls back on love. And I think coronavirus has showed that more than anything, because, you know, a lot of people's income would have been from gigging live, and that's just gone completely out of the window. You know, so I hope a lot of artists retain their love, or if they'd turned it into a bit of a machine, you know, and a working enterprise, that they can find that love again.
I think that the lockdown gives us an opportunity to restructure the way certain things work, especially in the live music industry. I think that there are things that need to be looked at there. One of my favorite artists of all time is Prince, and I think he was a lot of his letters that were misinterpreted in the 90s, from when people thought he lost his mind and changed his name to a symbol. What he was actually getting at was artist freedom, and making sure that the money goes to the right people. Money goes to the people that are responsible for creating it, because without that, there isn't a music industry. And I think that it's important that when we recover from this horrible situation that we've been in, that we do look at things to make sure that we can come back better and help artists to really flourish in a post-COVID world. And likewise, I'm sure via a reinvigorated music scene, I'm sure the podcast scene will keep up, because there'll be more things to enjoy and more things to talk about, which generates more content. So it's a happy cycle.
Yeah, I mean, Simon, that's at the end of the day, that's why we created this podcast, was because there are a lot of independent artists out there who need to be shown that love. At the end of the day, they're the ones who should get the recognition for it. And I always admire people going, you know, independent and staying there, because they're trying to keep control of their babies, their children, their music, their inspiration. And that's, as you said, that's what Prince was advocating. That's what, you know, a lot of big artists advocate. You know, Kanye West recently has had that whole thing on Twitter where he released all of his contracts and said, you know, and tried to unearth a bit behind the music scene. You know, and if through our podcast and other things, if we can do our bit to help artists, you know, gain that recognition and you know, and possibly one day earn a living, then, you know, as fans, that's all we can do, really.
Definitely agree with that.
And that's why, obviously, I created the Facebook page and then this. So
it's a wonderful thing.
Great. Well, thank you very much for talking to us, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to be on. Thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. And like I said, I'll put the links into your pages and podcast links. Sorry, I completely lost it then. Podcast links on the what's it called? The post. That's what I was looking for.
On the socials.
On the internet somewhere.
On the social thing. Yeah, that's going to be looking. There's me juggling.
I'll do my best to give you guys a shout out from our social media presence as well. So let's hope to build something really good here.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye.